Welcome to the information webinar on Measure U. Thank you for your attendance. This webinar is available in both English and Spanish. Attendees today have their video off and their microphones muted. You will be able to see the speakers and the moderator. Some of you may not be that familiar with the League. We are a nonpartisan organization. We encourage voting and informed and active participation of all citizens in government. We influence government through education and advocacy. The League does not support or oppose any candidate or political party. The League of Women Voters is celebrating its centennial year. We have been hosting candidate forums and informational seminars for decades. The League is known for providing fair, balanced, and educational programs. We ask attendees to submit their questions by emailing them to the League's email address, which should be on your chat screen. It's leagueofwomenvoters.sb@gmail.com. Please design your questions so that each panelist might be willing to answer it. Please do not send arguments or comments to the email. The panelists will not see them, and the League will not state them. The League reserves the right to edit the question or combine it with others to eliminate duplicates and in the interest of time. The League is known for civil discourse. Our moderator today is our program chair, Helen Tran. Let's begin.
Thank you, Betsy, for the introduction. It is good to be here, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. As Betsy stated, I am the League's program chair and moderator for today's webinar on Measure U, which is a voter initiative to repeal Fire Protection District 5, also known as FP5, that is on the upcoming November ballot. The League has no position on this measure and is hosting this information panel as part of the League's civic education. Today, we have a great lineup of speakers for you. We will have our County Fire Chief, Dan Munsey, provide the background as it relates to the current funding of the Fire Protection District 5. We have the pro side. The pro side will be presented by Natalie Zook of the Red Brennan Group. The con side will be presented by Jim Gorgoli, President of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 935. Then ending with our impartial analysis by our League member, John Longville. We will then ask questions to our speakers from our residents and attendees. As Betsy stated earlier, and a reminder, please email questions to leagueofwomenvoters.sb@gmail.com. You should be able to see that in the chat. This email is available in the chat. If you want to listen to today's webinar in Spanish, please click on the interpretation globe icon at the bottom of your screen to your right. I will now introduce you to our background speaker, County Fire Chief Dan Munsey. Chief Munsey is an Inland Empire native who grew up in Riverside prior to moving to San Bernardino County and joining the San Bernardino County Fire Department in 1995. Chief Munsey rose through the ranks from firefighter paramedic to fire chief in 2019. He believes in transparent government that is sufficient in its expenditures of the public's dollars and is accountable to the local community. Over the years, Chief Munsey has served on the board of directors of the Boys and Girls Club of the High Desert, was elected to the High Desert Water District for over 10 years, and has been a proud Rotary member for over a decade. Chief Munsey possesses a master's in public administration and bachelor's in business administration from the Grand Canyon University. Hold credentialing as a Chief Fire Officer and the Center for Public Safety Excellence, and is a graduate of the Special Districts Leadership Academy. Let's give a virtual warm welcome applause to County Fire Chief Dan Munsey.
Thank you, Ms. Tran. I appreciate your time in the League of Women Voters in hosting this event. Is there a way that I could have the presentation pulled up, please?
You should be able to pull it up on your end, or did you want us to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought that you were going to host it since I sent it to you. If you could pull through that, I'll go ahead and speak for a bit. I think it's really important to note that as your fire chief, I have to be very impartial on tax measures that pertain to the fire district. And in the case of FP5, I cannot advocate for or against this measure. So I'm just providing with some background to discuss the current finances of the district, how we're funded, and clean up some of the background that there's some gray area in. One important thing to note is that while we have the County of San Bernardino in our name, we're not actually part of the County of San Bernardino. We're an independent fire district, a special district, and do not have the powers that a county or city would do. For instance, when it comes to placing measures on the ballot, or in the case perhaps of a funding mechanism, we cannot legally do that. Instead, we have to use other processes that are available to the special district, which tend to be things like protest vote. We're funded by three major mechanisms. The first is property tax, and it's very interesting with Prop 13 how property taxes are actually divided across the county. And in the case of the fire district serving the 62 different communities that we serve, there's a variety of different percentages that are provided to the fire district. On top of the normal property tax, we do have fees for service. We are the second largest ambulance provider in the county and receive revenue from the ambulances. Typically, it's just sufficient to provide the services to the rural area or the underserved area, or typically known as the unprofitable area, to the private ambulance companies, which is why our district provides that service. We also receive fees for service for hazmat fees, inspection fees, and for some of our fire marshal. And then finally, the third major mechanism is FP5, which is Fire Protection 5, and I'm going to speak on that now. If I could go, I'm going to mention real quick that this presentation was first given May 19th, 2020, as it's indicated on the slide, and this is provided to the Board of Supervisors by Gary McBride and myself. The full presentation is well over an hour, and I'm not going to do the full presentation today. However, if you go to the County of San Bernardino, the Board of Supervisors, and look at the past meetings on May 19, 2020, you can watch the full context of the slides. Today, I've shortened the slide deck and just given the pertinent information so I can remain within my allotted time. Can I advance this slide, please? One more slide. First thing we'll look at is the fire district budget. And I mentioned that we have property taxes, we have fees for contract, and then we have special taxes. We also receive some money from the county general fund. As we're not a county department, we're not guaranteed access to the county general fund, and that is up to the Board of Supervisors each year to allocate that money to the fire district. Typically, the board will do that to provide service to unincorporated areas, or as you well know, the County of San Bernardino, being the largest county in the United States, has a lot of federal land and state land that does not have any property taxes allocated to the district, yet we're still required to maintain service. An example is driving on the 15 or the 40 or the 395 through our desert areas. If there's a car crash, which is a typical scenario, or hazmat material spill from a big rig or even a fire, there's no property tax in that area that pays for that service. Our fire department is broken down into 5 zones, and you'll see it as budget unit zone. And what that means is that the money that's raised in the mountain has to be spent in the mountain. The money that's raised in the North Desert must be spent in the North Desert, South Desert Valley, etc. We cannot take money that's raised in the valley and spend that money in our desert areas or the mountain. That would be illegal for us in the way that we're structurally built. So we have 4 geographical zones: the mountain, North Desert, South Desert, and Valley. And then we have a special operations administration. The administration is a lot more than just our executive chiefs and our administrative folks. It includes all the billing staff. It includes all the fire marshal's office. It also includes our training division, our EMS division, and then our wildland division, who have been working really hard over the last month. The next column, you'll see the property taxes that are allocated to each one of those zones. So in the North Desert, you'll see that there's 15,653,000. In the Valley, you'll see there's 44,900,000. The next category shows the fees, contracts, and other revenue. I want to point out the Valley. The Valley has 32 million in fees, and that seems like a lot. But that fee and contract includes the city of Fontana, who's not part of our fire district, yet contracts with the County of San Bernardino. And the vast majority of the fees that are shown there are that contract from Fontana. This is important to note because that contract money that's paid by the city of Fontana, that money must be spent in Fontana. We cannot share that across the valley. For instance, I can't take that money and pay for service in Grand Terrace. And then the third column, you'll see the county general fund. I don't think it's widely known. The county does give us money from the general fund. I think that people believe that FP5 replaced that, but there is still money that the county provides to the fire district for those unincorporated areas. There's about $1 million in the mountains, about 6.3 in the North Desert, and just under $1 million for the South Desert, with zero county general fund for the Valley. The reason is the Valley tends to be funded better by their property taxes, and with FP5, they do not require any additional county general fund at this time. And then there's $5 million for special operations. The special operations, that money generally goes to partnerships that we have with our county sheriff. We've got several great programs. We have our inmate fire crew. We're the only county in the United States that actually works with our county sheriff and has inmates to help us with our firefighting efforts. This is a great way to reduce costs to the district. We also partner with the sheriff in our helicopter program. The sheriff owns the helicopters, maintains them, has the pilots, has the fleet, and the mechanics. The fire district has some really great paramedics, so we partner those together to provide services throughout our county with our county sheriff. Finally, we look at the special tax, the FP5 special tax. It's about $5 million for the mountain, 11.7 for the North Desert, 9.5 for the South Desert, and about $14 million for the Valley. If you add that all up, the special tax is about $41.5 million, with our total revenue of about $200,000. Next slide, please. I want to spend just a second and talk about the FP5 breakdown. The first FP5 was in Hellendale in Silver Lakes. The community had a volunteer station, and unfortunately they were having a hard time recruiting volunteers that met the state standards. When I first started as a paid call firefighter, it was as simple as showing up. They gave you a badge and a uniform. They gave you a pager. Back then it was a voice pager that you wore in your belt. It was the size of a brick. And you started going to Tuesday night trainings and every Saturday. Unfortunately, in today's world, with the litigation that faces the district, the requirements to be a firefighter is now provided to us by the NFPA, by Cal OSHA, and the state fire training, which now takes about 16 weeks full time to receive all the training just necessary for firefighter, not including all the medical training that's required. So Hellendale, back in 2006 and 7, decided that they wanted to have a full-time station, but they needed to have the funding. So there was a special tax requiring a 2/3 vote that was placed in front of the voters. Hellendale voted for that. The revenue that's been approved for that area through that FP5, that original FP5, is about $1.1 million, which has allowed them to have a full-time station. A repeal of FP5 includes all of FP5 that I'm going to be discussing, including that original voter approved creation of FP5. The second four that you see, Needles, 29 Palms, San Bernardino, and Upland, San Antonio Heights, were created as these cities and areas joined County Fire. The city of Needles had a very low property tax, and they needed to raise revenue in order to have a fire station. So when they annexed their fire protection into the county fire district, they also annexed into that FP5 that Hellendale Silver Lakes had created to give them additional funding. About 25% of the money needed to fund a Needles fire station comes from FP5. The second city you'll see is 29 Palms. 29 Palms had zero property tax that was allocated towards fire protection. They had zero fees that were allocated towards fire protection. The fire district was underneath the water district, and the water district, by Prop 218, could not use water funds to pay for fire protection. When the city of 29 Palms annexed its fire powers into the county of San Bernardino Fire Protection District, they also annexed into FP5 in order to give them a revenue. That revenue is $2.3 million, which pays for their fire station. Their one fire station is completely funded by FP5. San Bernardino, as many are aware, went through bankruptcy. And as they were going through the bankruptcy proceedings, they needed to find a way to reduce expenditures in public safety. The way they did it is to annex San Bernardino City fire protection into our county fire district, at the same time annexing into FP5, which gave them about $8 million in revenue. That $8 million is about 4 fire stations. Seems like a lot of money, but a lot of the fire stations in San Bernardino have multiple units in there due to San Bernardino City being one of the most busy locales in the nation for responding to fires. And then finally, the fourth LAFCO approved annexation was Upland San Antonio Heights. When Upland joined us, San Antonio Heights was included in that FP5, which raised about $3.3 million, which pays for about 1.5 stations in that area. In total, there's about almost $14 million in LAFCO approved annexations into the fire district. And in order to do that, the funding that was required to provide service, the annexation to FP5. Finally, we come to the board approved FP5 expansion. This happened just over a year ago when the board approved the FP5 expansion over the entire service district, which is where it's at today, except for the city of Hesperia is not in FP5. And that included about $26.3 million. The reason is a lot of the area that we serve is underfunded with property taxes. There's simply no infrastructure, or because of the federal land that we're still required to provide the service, they needed to try to figure out a way to provide a sustainable funding mechanism for the district. In total, that's $41.5 million of revenue that is given to the district every single year. Next slide, please. We're much more than a fire district. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide here, but if you look it over, you'll see all the services that we actually provide. And I think this past month, you guys have seen a lot of smoke in the air, and you've seen our fire district respond to a lot of wildland fires. We certainly respond to a lot of structure fires, but we also are required to do all the rescues and provide all the EMS. We are the largest ALS or paramedic provider in the county. We're the second largest ALS transporter in the county. And the property tax money and the FP5 money and the fees for service all go to providing these services that you see on your screen. Next slide. These are some terms on the left that we think about as fire district leadership. Concentration refers to how close your fire stations are located. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. One is when there's a structure fire, commercial fire, hazardous material, we need to have more than just a couple of firefighters respond to mitigate that emergency. Often required by Cal OSHA or by Fed OSHA to have more than 3 firefighters on a scene, and sometimes the incident dictates. On a simple residential structure fire, for instance, we need to have 21 firefighters gather within a time frame that's actually going to make a difference and keep that fire within the house of origin or in the room of origin to effect a victim rescue and to extinguish that fire without it spreading to the neighbors. So concentration refers to how close your fire stations. With the loss of FP5 revenue, the fire stations will be spread out a lot longer, which may affect our ability to mitigate emergencies quickly and limit environmental damage. The second is distribution, which is across this county, the 20,000 square miles. How are the fire stations distributed? The most unequal distribution is in our north and south deserts. As you leave the city of Barstow, the next fire station you'll come to that's staffed is in Baker. That's almost 2 hours drive time. So distribution in that area is very poor. In the valley area, you tend to see the distribution a lot better with response times more closer to NFPA recommendations. The number of firefighters and the number of firefighters are on duty and available to respond in a geographical region per day. We certainly have automatic aid and mutual aid with our neighbors, which could be affected by the loss of FP5 and any reduction in firefighters. Simply put, our neighbors don't want to provide the best fire protection to our cities that the cities aren't paying for. So those auto aid and mutual aids would need to be renegotiated. Reliability is how often are you able to go to an alarm when you have multiple alarms occurring. So if, for instance, Fire Station 224 had a medical aid down the street, maybe this is a full arrest or somebody in cardiac arrest, the engine responds, and then they have a stroke victim within 3 minutes that calls 911. Is there another engine to respond to that call, or are they going to have to wait until our fire station at 224 clears the first medical aid, the cardiac arrest, and then responds to the second? And then effective response force is our ability to gather enough firefighters to mitigate an incident safely in the time required to prevent environmental damage. Next slide. On a macro view, people often ask, how will this affect the district? Give us the numbers. And it's very difficult to say exactly because this is a policymaker decision. Our plan as a district, if FP5 were repealed, is to cut $41.5 million. There's no other way that we can do it. We cannot create a budget that is not balanced. That would be illegal under California law. If we look at the different geographical areas, the money that's raised or lost due to repeal of FP5 would need to be lost in those geographical areas. So for instance, in the Valley, that would be a closure of just about 11 different stations, or could be a closure up to 11 different stations. Now, we could move some units around. I mentioned that we have multiple units at some stations to create a better distribution, but the reliability would decrease. So as we talk about stations, it's very difficult to give a good indicator, but we believe it would be about 19 across the district. The valley potentially could be 11. The mountains could potentially be 2 fire stations. So the valley area, just for perspective, is San Antonio Heights, Upland, all the way down through Mentone, including the cities of Grand Terrace, San Bernardino, Fontana, and all the unincorporated areas around that. The mountain service zone, as you start at the hills from Crestline all the way to Fawnskin. We currently staff 6 full-time stations. That could be a reduction down to 4. The North Desert has 10 full-time stations. That could be a reduction by 3 fire stations. The North Desert includes all the way from Oak Hills to the top of the pass through the city of Hesperia and Adelanto, turns a corner at Barstow and goes all the way out to the state line, just past Baker, but also includes the smaller communities of Trona, El Mirage, and the whole northwest side of our county. Finally, the South Desert. The South Desert goes from Yucca Valley all the way up to Needles. So it goes through the Morongo Basin, including the northern communities of Johnson Valley and Landers, goes all the way out through Joshua Tree, 29 Palms, Wonder Valley, follows 62 to 95, and all along the river there through Havasu Lake and Needles is included that South Desert. There's 6 full-time stations to cover that geographical area of almost 10,000 square miles. That would need to be reduced by 3. Next slide, please. Our firefighters are certainly not lazy. Our firefighters are amongst the busiest in the nation. This slide just indicates how busy our firefighters are on average compared to neighboring cities. In the blues, it shows the current calls that each firefighter responds to by average. Now, if you look at the valley, it says 232 calls. That doesn't mean they only run 232 calls per year, because firefighters work at a team. They're probably running 5 times that on average as a person. But if you take just the number of calls and divide it by the available firefighters in the area, this is how you derive this figure. So our firefighters in the valley run 233 calls, and you'll notice that in Chino, the average calls that they run, each firefighter is 88. The busiest area is Apple Valley with 229, and the next would be Colton with 180. With the loss of FP5, our firefighters in the valley would now be running 300 calls, which is about 71 more than on average per firefighter than their surrounding areas. I'm not concerned with how busy our firefighters are, because frankly, they tell me every day that they enjoy their job, they enjoy serving the public, and they're going to do their best to respond to calls. But what really worries me about this slide is that responding to calls really isn't our job. Our job is to prevent the calls. And if all you're doing is responding to calls, then you don't have the time that you need for public education, to go to the schools, to meet with the kids, to do the public awareness campaigns, to do the business inspections, to do the little things to prevent the incidents from occurring within our jurisdiction and to keep people safe. Across this slide, you can read it for yourself, but you can see that there is impacts on the number of calls that each firefighter would respond to. Next slide. This slide puts it a little more clearly that we would need to have staffing reductions with the repeal of FP5. I'll look at the total. It shows each geographical zone, but if you look at the totals in the top of the column, our current staffing level is 623 paid firefighters. Without that staffing, it reduces down to 457 firefighters, which is a loss of about almost 170 firefighters. The second breaks it down by classification. And certainly all our chief officers would some staffing would need to be eliminated, which affects our ability to manage the district in the transparent ways that we need to do it. But this slide here shows how many firefighter eliminations would need to occur in each rank. Again, this is on average. This would be a policy decision, but this gives an example of what a repeal of FP5, in order to meet a repeal of FP5, what we may need to do as a district. Next slide. So what does this actually mean for each service zone? Next slide. Next slide. This slide shows our West Valley zone and what's included. As you can see, it's Fontana all the way up to Mount Baldy. And battalion, there's 2 battalions in here. The battalion 1's the city of Upland. There's 3 paid fire stations. San Antonio, there's 1 paid fire station. The city of Fontana, we have 7 stations. These are all under contract and not are affected by FP5. But it's also important to note that if FP5 is repealed, the city of Fontana is not going to want to enter into a contract where their resources are responding into neighboring communities. So they may not, even though they work for our fire department, they may not be able to support our fire district unless it's an equal, even trade of automatic and mutual aid. The city of Bloomington also has one fire station. Next slide. Some possible reductions would be reduction in 1 to 2 staff fire engines in the Upland and San Antonio Heights area, reduction of 1 staff fire engine in the Bloomington area. Some other possible service level consequences would be increased response time, decrease in ability to perform victim rescue and limit fire spread in a timely manner, and decrease ability to assist with ambulance transportation to area hospitals. Every one of our fire apparatus has a paramedic on board. And there's one thing that I believe after being a paramedic for 20 years is that a fire department-based advanced life support paramedic service makes a difference in people's lives. One of those things that our paramedics will do is on critical calls, they'll get in the back of the ambulance and they'll ride with the patient to the hospital, because paramedics train in teams, and your AMR ambulances only show up with 1 paramedic on it, not 2. There's 1 EMT, 1 paramedic. Calls like cardiac arrest require multiple paramedics to be in the back of the ambulance in order to provide for successful outcomes. Next slide. Next slide. In the West Valley Service Zone, we also have an East Valley division. This is 14 staff stations. Mostly includes the city of San Bernardino, but also the cities of Grand Terrace and the unincorporated areas of Mentone, Rosina Ranch, and Muscoy areas, and DeVore. Next slide. Possible reductions would be reduction to 3 to 4 engine companies and 1 squad in the San Bernardino City area. Reduction in staffing of 4 fire stations, additional fire stations in the San Bernardino area. Increased response time could be up to 5 minutes higher in critical emergency, and decrease in ability for victim rescue and limit fire spread. Next slide. We'll advance through the Mountain Service Zone. Next slide. The Mountain Service Zone includes the areas of Crestline, Twin Peaks, Lake Arrowhead, Green Valley Lake, Angeles Oaks, and Forest Falls. There's 6 full-time stations. There's Crestline, Twin Peaks, Lake Arrowhead near the Lake Arrowhead Village, Lake Arrowhead near the Mountains Community Hospital, and Lake Arrowhead near the northeast edge of the lake, and also Fonskin. There's also 3 part-time paid staff county fire stations in Green Valley Lake, Angeles Oaks, and Forest Falls. Next. Service level reduction would be a closure of 2 fire stations, a possible reduction of 6 paramedic staffed engines down to 4 for that entire mountain area. And then the area served by part-time paid call firefighters, the impact of revenue loss will be detrimental to staffing, infrastructure replacement, and apparatus equipment replacement. Simply put, the property tax in those areas is very limited, and it's not enough to pay for the equipment, let alone the staffing. Next slide. The final service zone that I want to talk geographical service zone is the South Desert. Next slide. The South Desert has 6 fire stations: Needles, Havasu Landing, 29 Palms, Yucca Valley, and Yucca Mesa. Those of you that are familiar with this area will recognize that it takes you about 3 or 4 hours just to drive from one end to the other. Right now, there's 6 fire stations. We talked about concentration earlier, about how close or how evenly distributed your fire stations are. You'll see there's a big gap between 29 Palms and Havasu Landing and Needles, as it is. Next slide. Some of the service level reductions will be a possible closure of 3 fire stations. Possible reductions of firefighters from 17 personnel per day, so there's 17 firefighters per day serving that area, to 9 personnel. The average response time will nearly double in the suburban areas. It'll be much more in the outlying areas, with the potential of elimination of paramedic ambulance service in Yucca Valley. This increased response time of up to 8 minutes on average in critical emergencies in those urban areas, and decrease in ability to perform victim rescue and limit fire spread. Next slide. One more. This is showing the North Desert Division. It includes Adelanto. Adelanto is a contract just like the city of Fontana, so the money that's raised in Adelanto underneath that contract must be spent in the city of Adelanto. There's two fire apparatus in the city of Adelanto that provide service there. We have the annexed city of Hesperia. We have Lucerne Valley, Wrightwood, Phelan, Pinion Hills, Baldy Mesa, and Summit Valley. We also have a second division in this area, Division 6, which includes Spring Valley Lake, Silver Lakes, Hellendale, El Mirage, Baker, Hinckley, Toronto, Harvard, and Mountain View Acres. Again, those of you that are familiar with this area will recognize that this is a huge geographical expanse and very hard to provide service in a quick or what would almost be considered standard manner in the fire service. Next slide. The loss of FP5 funding would result in elimination of about $12 million in the North Desert Service Zone. So this would impact the fire emergency capabilities in the high desert in a region that's historically been under-resourced due to its sheer geographical size. In certain areas, we have currently have response times exceeding 1 hour. Next. So the possible service reductions would be up to 3 fire stations closed, a reduction of 3 battalion chief positions, a further reduction of 3 fire engines, elimination of 1 paramedic squad, reduction of 4 paramedic ambulances, elimination of emergency hazardous material response capability. As you can imagine, there's a whole lot of hazardous material that responds to that area, not only with the Common Pass and the 15 freeway, but the significant rail that's traveling through there every day. A reduction in urban search and rescue capability, staffing reduction on 2 fire engines to a smaller, less capable brush patrol, and a total staffing reduction of almost 17 firefighters. Next. One more. Our administrative section, as I mentioned, includes the wildland division. We receive a lot of money from the general fund, and I would anticipate that general fund money would need to be reallocated back to paying for fire stations. So we would lose our wildland division, our ability to respond to a lot of the wildland fires that we respond to in our summer fire season. Our training and safety division would have significant reductions, which would really hinder us from providing the state, federal, and local mandates training to our employees, and an inability to continue to develop our employees through remedial and career development training, and would make it very difficult to support the specialty programs of HAZMAT, USAR, and our ARF. And finally, our EMS division, which is required to ensure that our paramedics are trained to the full compliance on law and to produce the best outcomes. In other words, how many saves are you going to have with your full arrests? They would have a decreased inability to support overseeing the training, to provide the ambulance operator service program, the ability to research and develop forward-thinking EMS programs, and ability to properly and support personnel. Next slide. The Office of Fire Marshal is supported mostly by fees, but there's a lot of services that can't be provided by fees. Some of these that are provided services through general fund support include fire planning and engineering, plan reviews, new construction inspections, annual and state mandated fire inspections. All these will continue to occur, but the fees may need to be increased, and then the length of time that it requires to turn around a plan review, for instance, may increase. The fire and arson investigator programs are not supported by property tax or FP5, that's general fund. We are working on a K-9 program to increase the success rate in finding some of the arsonists that live within our region. The inability to provide public education, our juvenile fire setter program, which is a program that if we do find juveniles that are starting fires, we put them through this fire setting program in order to educate them and remediate them. This program has been very successful for a number of years, but isn't funded by any other means. And then the fire suppression support activities such as damage assessment, as we saw in the cities of Yucaipa and Oak Glen. Our fire prevention unit comes in and they do that damage assessment to provide the homeowners so they can collect on their insurance quicker versus hiring a private party to come in and do that and waiting months to be able to get back into their houses and collect the insurance money. Next slide. Let's go ahead and just skip this. I'll allow you folks to read it at another time if you'd like. One more slide. There are some secondary impacts with loss of funding. The first that I'll point out is a decreased ISO rating. This is an insurance service office. ISO is often used by insurance agencies to determine how much your insurance rates are going to be. This is based on how close your fire stations are to your house. It's based on the water capability. It's also based on the capability the fire department has to be able to put personnel on a scene to mitigate the incident prior to it spreading to other people's houses or to limit the damage maybe to one bedroom. There's a good chance that your insurance rating could go up if there's a loss of fire protection in your neighborhood. Decreased ability to support other county and city departments. We really look at ourselves as a community fire department. If we have the ability to extend a service to a city or county, we do it because by reducing money to the county and cities, they're able to provide our citizens a better experience within those communities. An example might be sending a ladder truck to a park to change a light bulb in the park. So it doesn't require a city to hire a high lift truck and put personnel and spend thousands of dollars changing the light bulb. Something we can do very quickly, or even to adjust a camera that's used by our law enforcement partners. And decrease in large emergency incident funding. This is very concerning. A fire like we just had over in Oak Glen area, the El Dorado fire cost the district about $4 million to respond to and to mitigate. Without having that money come in, we will simply not have the resources to put on that fire, which may mean that those fires burn a little more out of control and create more damage to our communities. Decreased ability to reduce the risk prior to events occurring, and I mentioned that's our job. We need to be better at preventing emergencies, but we still need to have the ability to respond to them. Decrease in public education and prevention, and decrease the ability to fund capital and apparatus replacement. Next slide. We're working on some great innovations. We're working on ECNS, which is a nurse hotline program. We would be amongst the first in the nation to do this. This would be putting nurses into our 911 center. So when someone calls and they may not have a true 911, I need an ambulance to go to the hospital emergency, they would talk to our nurses, which could then refer the patient to alternate destinations, to an urgent care, to a doctor's office, to a patient advocacy, to their own insurance. But this is one of the ways that we're working to reduce expenditures in the fire department and reduce how many unnecessary calls that our fire department responds to. But we're also working heavily with technology. And the common example is using drones. A drone that flies over our county is able to immediately find the emergency and to determine what level of response should be sent. An example is a car crash in the Common Pass. We may send one fire engine to that car crash in an ambulance, but what if that car crash started a fire? And what if that fire spread to the hillside? And now that hillside's affecting structures in the area, well, you need to send a much bigger response. Using technology, we're able to right size our response to the emergency. There's several other technology platforms that we're using that we would need to reduce in order to live within our budget. We would have to eliminate many of our administrative staffing, which affects our project management, our strategic planning, and community risk assessments. And it finally decreases our ability to respond to 911 calls. The thing that I worry about most, though, is our firefighter safety, and we need to make sure that we have ongoing training. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions as the moderator allows.
Thank you, Chief Mundy. I will now introduce you to our pro speaker, Natalie Zook. Natalie Zook grew up in Redlands, California. She earned her bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in history from San Francisco State University. Moving from Redlands to San Francisco gave her a taste of urban life, where her political career began as an intern for a civil forfeiture law firm in San Francisco and now serves as the media and public relations director for the Red Brennan Group. Natalie has worked on various campaigns throughout San Bernardino County on both sides of the political aisle. She believes grassroots voter outreach efforts are the best way to make real change happen, especially at the local level. While serving as a signature gatherer for the Red Brennan Group, Natalie talked to as many as 1,000 individual voters on a given day. In her free time, she can be found exploring Joshua Tree National Park with her dog, Mojave, or traversing in the high desert where she lives in 29 Palms. Let's give a virtual warm welcome applause to Natalie Zook.
Thank you, Helen. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. All right, so yeah, I'm Natalie Zook. I work for the Red Brennan Group. I started as a signature gatherer back in August of last year, and that's when I really got to know about the fire tax. In fact, I learned about the fire tax by talking to voters and people in their community who were politically involved, and that's, you know, kind of when I realized something doesn't really smell right here. So I'll get right into it. So Measure U, it was a ballot initiative signed by over 30,000 registered voters throughout San Bernardino County. I personally collected thousands of signatures myself. You know, I spent hours trudging in rain, 100-degree weather, snow, even going door to door gathering signatures from people and just informing them about this tax, first of all, because a lot of people didn't know that they were paying it. So voting yes repeals that $157 FP5 tax. So Chief Munsey already kind of touched light on this. What is Fire Protection Zone 5? It originated in the community of Hellendale, which is north of Barstow. It's kind of far if you live in the valley more. It was originally passed by 1,022 voters in a special 2006 election. As Chief Munsey said, they wanted their own fire department and they made it happen, which we fully support. When they voted on it, they approved a $117 special tax with a 3% annual increase. If the fire department opposes that increase. And I believe they have asked for that 3% increase every year except maybe once or twice. It originally covered 5.6 square miles in the Hellendale Silver Lake area. And now, since the Board of Supervisors expanded it, it now covers over 19,000 square miles. So it went from affecting around 5,000 people in Hellendale to affecting over 1 million people throughout the county. It was expanded in October of 18 to include all unincorporated areas of the county, plus Yucca Valley, Needles, and Grand Terrace, and Upland and San Bernardino, respectively, annexed their fire departments in 2016 and 2017. So here you see a notice that the County Registrar of Voters sent out to property owners and registered voters in Hellendale back in 2006. It says that state law provides that a special tax can only be imposed if at least 2/3 of the voters registered in the area of the proposed tax return their ballots and vote in favor of the tax. This is based on something called the Right to Vote on Taxes Act, better known as Prop 218, which was passed by California voters in 1996, I believe, which says that no local government may impose, increase, or extend any special tax unless and until that tax is submitted to the electorate and approved by a 2/3 vote. So the essential guiding principle behind this is that those 1,022 voters in Hellendale, they got to vote on it. The other 350,000 registered voters in San Bernardino County who are paying this tax did not get to vote on it. Many residents in San Bernardino County are getting double taxed. Many people, for example, in Grand Terrace, they pay 10% of their property taxes already to San Bernardino County Fire, on top of the $157.26 fire service tax. So they have a property tax rate of 1% in Grand Terrace. Let's say your home costs $400,000. That means your property taxes are $4,000 annually. 400 of that goes to county fire on top of the $157 fire service tax, which means by the end of the year, we're paying about over $500 to county fire. If you were to divvy that up, that's over $50 a month. This is also a regressive tax, meaning that if you have a 1 acre property or a very small parcel of land, we're all paying the same rate, which means it disproportionately affects families who have budgets, low income families. So it's pretty much unfair. You could have, a giant 100,000 square foot Amazon warehouse in San Bernardino, and it would be paying the same $157 as Jim and Pam who live across the street, which I personally don't think is fair. It's also, keep in mind the 3% cap. It was originally $117 back in 2006, but because of that, it's now $157 in 2020, and it will keep increasing, and it doesn't have any stoppage to it in the legislation whatsoever on that 3% increase. So some people could say this tax could continually increase year after year. Then here we have some numbers from the county fire budget. You can see the breakdown from 2011 to 2018. Curiously, you can see as FP5 got expanded, the fire department actually closed down a large number of stations. At its peak in 2017, just prior to the Upland and Needles annexations, they were operating 67 fire stations. And then after the implementation of FP5, and despite seeing an increase in their budget of over $116 million, the amount of fire stations decreased to 48. So people are paying more, but getting less fire services. I talked to voters in Upland who said, oh yeah, our response times doubled because they closed the fire station that was down the street from my house, unfortunately. Then here we can see where staffing has changed from 2010 to 2020 within the county fire department. You see that a lot of this money is going towards administrative expenses, while service in the other 3 zones has gone down. The Valley region, which is the most concentrated urban population in the county, has gone up. So these people who live in the outskirts of the county are seeing, their staffing go down, while people who live in the city areas are getting increased services. One argument I've heard from voters is that people in unincorporated areas are carrying the burden of fire services for other people. Many of these service zones are very vast. We have the mountain region, the north region, south and valley. The valley, geographically, it's the smallest, but population, it's the largest. And you can just see, Munsey said that the money raised within these zones stays within these zones, but when you consider how large these zones are, you realize that if you live in the unincorporated area of Mentone, your FP5 dollars are probably getting spent in the city of San Bernardino, which is 14 miles away. And then here you see some more budgeting numbers. Salaries and benefits have gone up. Their tax revenue has gone up. They've also gotten a lot of grants and government financing, especially now with COVID-19 in consideration. And the fee and service charge revenue has increased by 800%. San Bernardino County also has a massive pension issue. Former County Chief Mark Hartwig also publicly stated to voters in Grand Terrace that in San Bernardino County, sometimes even as much as 70 cents for every payroll dollar goes towards pensions. And it's an undue burden that our county is going to have to confront directly eventually. So what can $157 get you in San Bernardino County? $157 is the cost of groceries for the month if you receive food stamp benefits. And I know that because I've been on food stamps before. The max you can receive as an individual is $196. So $157 is a lot of money. It equates to 6 days worth of meals for a family of 4, the cost of 2 cell phone bills. And with COVID-19 in mind, our current unemployment rate in San Bernardino County is over 10%. So $157 means a lot to the people out here, especially now. So if you vote yes on Measure U, it'll save your property taxes. It'll save you $157. A lot of people say, oh, I'm a renter, so I don't have to worry about property taxes. But if your landlord sees his property taxes go up, that will translate over to you in the form of a rent increase. And with that in mind, I'm going to play you guys a video we have just going over some of the footage from that October 2018 meeting. The Board of Supervisors listened to over 4 hours of public testimony to people who were against the FP5 expansion, and the supervisors still decided to expand this. So I'm going to play this video for you guys.
In the county of San Bernardino, we don't let children vote on taxes. What children? You, of course. The tax-paying citizens of the county. At least, that's how the board members see you, children. So they pass illegal taxes without your vote because they claim to be your parents. What? Does this sound crazy? Listen for yourself.
Last year in 2018, the board successfully passed a resolution to approve the expansion of FP5. There comes to a point where, as a board, you're essentially the parents of the citizens that we have, and some of the burden has to go on the citizens to pay.
All right. So I'd also like to note, with that in mind, 3 of the 5 people who signed the ballot argument against Measure U are not San Bernardino County residents. They live outside our county. One of them is Jim Bergoli himself. So these people are living outside our county, and they're kind of meddling with us, and that's not cool. 2020, people are angry, people are upset, people want change, and it's not fair for the county to force voters, disenfranchised tax fiscal malfeasance of our county's bureaucracy. With that in mind, I thank you guys. If you want to check out more info, here are our websites. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. I will now introduce you to our con speaker, Jim Bergoli. Jim has been in the fire service for over 30 years and currently holds the rank of fire captain with San Bernardino County Fire Department. Captain Bergoli is the president of the International Association of Firefighters Local 935, a position he has held for 10 years. Let's give a virtual warm welcome applause to Captain Jim Bergoli.
Well, thank you, Helen, and the League of Women Voters. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I don't get most of the time I get to speak to groups and let them know about this measure, and I've been kind of making my way around the county. So I appreciate this group's time to let me talk to you about this. I'll first talk a little bit about the measure, and I know Chief Muncie did a great job of how it was created, and it was created down in Hallandale and expanded into the communities of 29 Palms, Needles, San Bernardino, and Upland. And then the county board initially overlaid it on the entire county. So that everybody should know when Chief Muncie talks about the generation or how we generate money here, the property tax that is generated was never meant to be sustainable for the growth that has happened in our county to be able to properly serve the citizens of this county. And I appreciate Ms. Zook turning around and taking the opportunity to let people know that I don't live in this county, but I have served this county loyally for 30 years now, and fought fires and protected and went on medical aids for the citizens for over 30 years. So I do have a responsibility to this county. Because I choose to live somewhere else doesn't mean that I'm not dedicated to this county. So thank you for letting people know that I do live outside. So I want to further go on to talk to you about some of the things that how this will impact. I will tell you right now that the fire service here in San Bernardino County is grossly understaffed. It is grossly understaffed. There is areas in the county presently that it takes us over 2 hours to get to. And why we could talk about the Valley Service Zone and the number of units that we have down here, it is because of the population, because the NFPA requires that so many firefighters per the amount of population in each area. So that's why it is. I've talked to the board many times about the underserved areas that we have and the extensive response times that we have, and the burden that it places on the county fire department, and that we need more services. But instead, we're faced with a measure that is looking to take away the services. Um, there's just some things that have went that she presented um, that simply when they're trying to take away this, they talk about, she mentioned that she understands the need for Hellendale to have their services, but part of their measure here removes the services in Hellendale. It also removes the services in San Bernardino, Upland, 29 Palms, and Needles, all which voted on it the same way all the citizens voted on it, where there was a ballot sent out to the property owners, and it was called a protest vote. That was legally done, and it wasn't a 2/3 vote. It was a protest vote of the property owners. Now we're in the process of going out to a vote of the citizens because they want to take away your fire services. I hope everybody understands the impacts that this will mean. When we talk about insurances, right now with the present wildfires, it is incredibly difficult for many areas to get even property insurance anymore. When Chief Muncie talks about the ISO rating, it will soon be almost impossible if you start to close fire stations in certain areas for them to be able to maintain property insurance. That with the lack of firefighters can only mean a catastrophic event is coming. So just a few things, just to rebut a few things that were said. When you talk about in Grand Terrace, she mentioned a couple of communities, Grand Terrace and Mentone. I will tell you, Grand Terrace and Mentone both do not generate enough money to sustain a full-time fire station. What happens is the Valley Service Zone keeps that money and provides them the extra money that are needed to provide a full-time fire station. Those are in the unincorporated areas, except that Grand Terrace is actually a city, but Mentone's an unincorporated area. She talked about the additional staffing since 2013 in the Valley area. Well, that was with the addition of us maintaining Upland and San Bernardino fire departments. And of course, in the desert, when she talks about a reduction up there, that was, of course, Victorville pulling out of the county fire district and going back to their own fire department. So that kind of talks about the staffing. The fire station closers, I would challenge anybody to really look into the fact that, and Chief Muncie could speak about this further, about if there were true closers of any of our fire stations, because if there were, I certainly don't remember it. The 3% had to be built in to the original so that everybody understands. If you didn't build a 3%, it could never stay up with the cost. And then the county fire district would be upside down again and asking for more general fund. That's why it was built in. So these are some of the things that that they talk about and that they put on their website, that they put on their mailers, that are completely untrue. And I'd just like to tell you that I do live out of the county, but the three people that are financing this, a gentleman from up north, Mr. Steinman out of Wrightwood, but he's a registered voter in Florida, and they're financing this campaign, and the president of Red Brennan, who lives in the San Diego area, they're financing this campaign against the citizens of San Bernardino County, none of which have a vested interest here in San Bernardino County. So I will tell you that I do live outside of the county. I'm not afraid. And I, again, thank you, Ms. Zook, for putting me on camera. I don't get to do that too often. So I appreciate your time, and I'll answer any questions you have for me.
Thank you, Jim. I will now introduce you to our impartial analysis speaker, League member John Longville. John currently serves on the Board of Trustees with the San Bernardino Community College District since 2008. at which time he retired from his adjunct faculty position at San Bernardino Valley College. He is also a member of the board of directors of the San Bernardino Valley Water Conservation District and has previously served as a member of the California State Assembly, mayor of Rialto, and member of the Rialto City Council. John Longville has been active in a wide array of local civic and charitable organizations since he first moved to San Bernardino County in 1972 to work as a press secretary for the late Congressman George Brown. Let's give a virtual warm welcome applause to our league member, John Longville.
Thank you very much, Helen. This is quite a complex financially situation regarding this ballot measure, and it requires looking at a variety of documents and sources. I've checked the local San Bernardino County Registrar of Voters, various information sources, and the California Secretary of State's various voter resources, and essentially what I'm finding, and excuse me, turning my head, I'm going to look at another computer screen here as I'm talking. Essentially, the largest amount of financing for the no side, the position which would be to retain the existing situation, is coming from, let's see, Good Government San Bernardino, which is a PAC that has spent and raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000, I believe, something like that, and with financing from firefighters and various property interests, including realtors, which is very common on measures of this sort. People that would be affected. The primary funding for the other side is more difficult to find, but a lot of it is out of a group called a Better Community Incorporated, which apparently financed the petition circulating drive, and which has some unusual distinctions. You have to look at finance records from last year to find the money for the petition drive, which was spent in 2019. But in 2020, it's also raised a significant amount of money. And one of their biggest sources is this Mr. Steinman that identifies himself as from Jacksonville, Florida, and has put six-figure sums personally into the thing. He identifies himself as being with a development company. And harder to find is a second individual, Chris Roofer, who Jim had pointed out was on the lawn signs that are being used by the measure committee. Because of campaign regulations, it's required to list your biggest contributors in small print on the lawn signs, and it lists both Steinman and this guy Roofer. But all I can find from Roofer, I can't find any records anywhere of him actually donating into this thing. Although on the Secretary of State's website, it does show him in the current election cycle donating to a variety of sources, something on the order of $700 and some thousand. So he's a major campaign donor, but I can't find the records of him having donated in this particular one, although apparently there is something because he's listed on a lawn sign. So this is a very expensive fight that is being waged, and and I would urge the league to invite the two sides to perhaps explain why the particular funding sources, what their interests are in why they're funding the particular positions they are. I think that explains more than anything else about what this measure is. It's a very complex matter, obviously.
Thank you, John. We will now open for questions and allow speakers to have an opportunity to answer them. And just to go back to John's last statement, perhaps Natalie and Jim, would you both like to speak to that? Natalie, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, John, for that impartial analysis. I know looking at all the campaign finance records can be a bit daunting. So A Better Community, Inc., it was formed to contract labor services to the Red Brennan Group. So technically, I work for A Better Community, Inc., but I represent the Red Brennan Group. Chris Rupert, he owns the world, or I think he distributes 40% of our nation's tomatoes and tomato sauce. He lives out in Central California. He has contributed to numerous campaigns in California before. Eric Steinman, he is my boss. I was actually just talking to him right now, and he said he would be glad to hop in here and answer any questions any of you guys have. Eric's a really cool guy. He lives out of Wrightwood. I would call him probably a constitutionalist, a very principled man. He doesn't have any skin in this aside from the principle behind what we're fighting against. And that's the fact that, San Bernardino County has been marred with, bankruptcies, terrorist attacks, very unfortunate events. Like I said, the unemployment rate is 10%, and our county politicians aren't representing voters. I told you guys there was over 4 hours of public testimony from people who were against the FP5 expansion, and the Board of Supervisors went ahead and passed it anyway. So what Eric cares about is bettering San Bernardino County. That's all.
Thank you, Natalie. Jim, would you like to have an opportunity to speak?
Yeah, I'll speak about, first of all, about our funding. Our funding is from some of the firefighters. It's also from the Better Government, which consists of the realtors who understand the impacts that this will create by removing fire stations. Will put a burden on the on them being able to sell homes in our urban areas due to the fact that they won't be able to get insurance. It also comes from the builders. It also comes from our labor partners, the sheriffs, the Teamsters, and SEIU. So that is where our funding has been coming from for this measure. They all believe in the essential, that the fire department is an essential services and it's needed by the community. But just quickly to talk about their funding comes from Mr. Steinman, who is a registered voter in Florida. He does have property in Wrightwood. He owns multiple cell sites all over San Bernardino County. It comes from Mr. Roofer, who lives up in Woodland. He does own a processing plant for food, and he provides it. And then the third thing is there was a funding by the Better Community, Inc. That they had funded for what they called, when COVID had happened, a PPP loan. And that was a loan from the federal government. That was a small business loan that the Better Community, Inc., that Ms. Zook works for, filed for and received $130,000 back. I could get you the date, but it's back about a year plus ago. And so they filed for that, and they received $130,000. So what we have, the question that you have to ask is, why is somebody who lives in Florida, registered in Florida, a gentleman out of Sacramento, and a group that is gaining money from a small business loan, trying to take away fire protection services in San Bernardino County. So I think that's a question that the voters need to ask and people need to understand, that the people that are behind, that are trying to keep the FP5 measure are all locals who are trying to make sure that this county is better and continue to grow. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, so we have gathered questions from residents and attendees, and we have a total of 6 questions as of right now. So I will start asking the first question. That is, who wrote the initiative Measure U and with what intention? Natalie, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure what they mean by to what attention. I believe it was physically written by our president, Tom Murphy, who grew up in Wrightwood. He used to work at a horse stable out there when he was 16. And the Steinman family, very well-known family in Wrightwood, offered him a job. But yeah, Tom's a cool guy. I think if you were to read the petition initiative and the arguments, it's his wording.
Thank you, Natalie. Jim, would you like to speak to that? Who wrote the initiative Measure U and with what intention?
I don't know who wrote it from their side. I would trust that Ms. Zook is correct, that it is Mr. Murphy. He lives in Oceanside. I understand that possibly he did grow up in Wrightwood, but presently he lives in Oceanside, and this even goes further to what I had talked about before.
Thank you, Jim. Question number 2. With California on fire, how would Measure U benefit our county? Jim, would you like to speak to that, or?
Well, with California on fire, Measure U, the removal of FP5 will only hurt our county. I think you could further go to Chief Muncie on this, but again, I will tell you that our resources are already spread incredibly thin. And then when we do have these big fires like we just did in the El Dorado incident, and we have many resources that are up on the Bobcat incident that's coming down into the backside of Wrightwood, the firefighters are spread incredibly thin already. And the removal of a funding measure that helps make sure that we have fire service and a quality, sustainable fire service in San Bernardino County could not be the right way. That's why I support a no on Measure U.
Thank you, Jim. Natalie, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, so how would repealing Measure U benefit California when California is on fire? That's a very weighted question, I would say. If we repeal Measure U, it would benefit our county because the voters would be able to tell our elected officials that we don't want tax increases that we never got to vote on. It's $157 and it increases 3% each year. Do I call the fire department every day? No, but with how much I'm paying in the FP5 tax, I feel like I should be. You know, I want to get my money's worth. If we let the county get away with this $157 tax, then what's going to come next? Another tax from the sheriff's department maybe, or our city council members? It's not cool. It's the principle that we're fighting for. And the money prior to FP5, the money came from the county general fund. And we actually have audited the county ourselves. We've submitted dozens of public records requests with the county and the San Bernardino County Fire Department. We did the math. If FP5 gets repealed, the money would come from the general fund and the county would only have to shift about 0.6% of its overall budget.
Thank you, Natalie. Okay, question number 3. What loss of fire assistance would residents incur if Measure U passes? Jim, would you like to speak to that?
The loss of fire services?
What loss of fire assistance would residents incur if Measure U passes?
Okay, well, again, I think this may be a little better for Chief Muncie, but Obviously, he has stated that the intention would be to close up to 17 fire stations. And I think that in itself is a loss, but I think maybe Chief Muncie can further just on the details of what kind of losses will be sustained by the removal of that.
Chief Muncie, would you like to add to that?
I think the presentation that was provided answered that question. It's up to 19 fire stations. Again, that's a policymaker's decision. It's my job to provide the best fire service within our means to do so. I think that this tax measure is an opportunity for the voters to vote on how they want to fund this fire department to what level. But there are impacts to each service zone. And again, those are divided by the 5 service zones. The North Desert could potentially lose 2 to 3 fire stations and up to 75 firefighters. The Valley regions, especially in the cities of San Bernardino and Upland, could close a significant number of fire stations and have less firefighters. The Mountain Service Zone could lose 2 fire stations. The South Desert's Service Zone, which has 6 for a very large area, could be reduced down to 3 fire stations. I'll refer back to the presentation that was provided to this group for the full details in that.
Thank you, Chief Muncie. Natalie, would you like to have an opportunity to speak to that?
Yeah, so FP5 was implemented and they already closed 17 fire stations. So yeah, they're gonna shut down fire stations and they're gonna open up new ones, and that's how fire stations work. You know, it's a county-wide operation.
Can I provide a point of clarification on that item, please?
Yes.
As a fire district, one of our missions is to provide a lot of efficiency in what we do. And so the closure of fire stations that I believe that Ms. Zook is referring to weren't staffed fire stations. They were stations that were in an inventory, but weren't staffed for a number of years. For instance, Mountain View Acres, which was in the middle of the city of Victorville, is surrounded by fire stations. It was a vacant building. We transferred that to the sheriff's department so they could host their search and rescue team. There's a variety of stations like that throughout the county that did not have staffing. It looks like we closed fire stations. What we were simply doing is removing them from our inventory so we didn't have to pay O&M on those fire stations or ongoing costs to maintain them to create efficiency. So with the loss of FP5, though, the difference is we are talking about actual currently staffed fire stations. These would not be stations that are simply in our inventory and empty.
Thank you, Chief Muncie. Okay, question number 4. If this service is lost, what would replace it? Jim, would you like to answer that?
Well, I think like Chief Muncie says, that would be a policymaker decision, but at the present time, if these services were lost, there's nothing set to replace it. So when you close down a fire station, it would be closed and there would be no staffing, and because there would be no funding to keep it open. Fire stations, like Ms. Zook just said, just don't come and go. Fire stations are here. They're pillars of the community. You could go to any community and they stay in place for a long time. Chief had a very good explanation of the excessive amount of buildings that were there. I wouldn't even have called them fire stations, but they were buildings. And those were moved were to save costs to the citizens because there was nobody kept in them, no full-time stations. So unlike what Ms. Zook said, where fire stations just come and go and it's cool, well, it's not. The citizens need these. And in fact, there needs to be more in order to provide the proper service to the city or to the county of San Bernardino. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Natalie, will you speak to that question?
Yeah, I already answered the question. The money is going to come from the general fund. Prior to FP5, the money came from the general fund. And if FP5 were to get repealed, I'm sure our Board of Supervisors would take the money again from the general fund. And as I stated, it would only cause the county to have a restructuring of about 0.6% of its overall budget. And regarding those fire stations that closed, yeah, I know a lot of them were dilapidated buildings. Some of them had asbestos and mold, I'm sure. So you guys closed them down. Like I said, I talked to voters in Upland. Upland generates over $6 million to the county fire department. So it's no wonder that Mark Hartwig, who was the fire chief at the time, wanted them to annex into his fire department. But unfortunately, there was a fire station that got closed down in Upland. And as I said, there are voters out there who said their response time increased.
Thank you, Natalie. All right, now question number 5. Do you support or oppose Prop 15, which if passed would add revenue to San Bernardino County Fire District? Jim would like to answer that.
So Prop 15 is a measure that's coming up on the upcoming ballot. So that everybody knows, the San Bernardino County firefighters fall under what is called the California Professional Firefighters. And the California Professional Firefighters work with various groups for different measures that are put on the ballot every year. The California Professional Firefighters send out a voter information sheet to every firefighter in the state of California, and what that does is it basically helps us to the firefighters to say what measures they are supporting. So as far as the California Professional Firefighters go, they are supporting that measure. Every one of my firefighters that is in IFF Local 935, which I have about 800 plus of them, has their own decision on what they do on their own specific, how they vote on that measure. So I don't encourage anybody on what to vote on. The California Professional Firefighters does send out a mailer to each of us to tell us which measures they support and which people that they are supporting in the election also. So one other thing quickly about that you need to know is that if, and I'm very pessimistic about a lot of measures that says there's going to be money that comes to the fire department, because there's a lot of measures that are set up that maybe don't always get the money that ends up supposed to be in the right place. But if the money was going to come, the majority of that money would come to the Valley Division, where that measure would be affected the most. We would still maintain an extreme deficit out in our desert areas and in our mountain communities. So.
Thanks, Jim. Natalie?
So the Red Brennan Group is nonpartisan. We're party agnostic, which means, we don't represent Republicans or Democrats. What we represent is a set of principles, and if you align with those principles, we'll support you. Regarding Prop 15, the Red Brennan Group has no official stance. I agree with Jim Gaboli in that, everybody within our organization has their own opinions, and I'm sure we have Republicans and Democrats and everything in between, out here. And I always encourage everybody to read legislation carefully and make their own opinions.
Thank you, Natalie. Question number 6. Why does it take 2/3 votes to create the district, but only a simple majority to eliminate it? Jim or Natalie? Natalie, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so it was created by a 2/3 vote in Hellendale only. And that was just because it involved a special tax, because the California Constitution, Article 13C, states that you cannot impose, increase, or extend any special tax unless and until that tax is submitted to the electorate and approved by a 2/3 vote. So as I stated during the presentation, only 1,022 people approved it, and it impacts over 1 million residents.
Thank you, Natalie. Jim, did you want anything to add to that, or? to that question regarding about the 2/3 votes? Or are you good?
No, I'm good.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, we have 2 more questions came in, actually 3 more. The next question, this question is for Chief Munsey. Are the areas that are 2 hours away protected by Arizona Fire Services?
Yes, absolutely. Automatic aid and mutual aid is how the fire service works. Regionalization of fire service wherever possible reduces costs. So in the case of those fire stations along the Arizona border, we have a reciprocal automatic and mutual aid between the Arizona fire agencies there and the California Fire Service Agency. So it's not just county fire, but could include, for instance, Buckskin or Mojave Valley Fire, but also with the Arizona Bureau of Land Management, California Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service. Many parties are involved in this agreement. So in Needles has one fire engine in their fire station, yet they cover a huge area. So it's really important for us to have these agreements because as the Needles fire engine responds to a call, there's nobody to back it up if we didn't use those Arizona resources. Now, these agreements are reciprocal. In other words, they have to be like for like. So as we enter into agreements, they're typically based on 3-person staffing and a Type 1 fire engine, as described by these agreements. So our Needles fire engine also goes into Arizona to back them up on their fires. Most commonly, we see that on the wildland fires, but we also see that on structure fires. And then when they're at drawdown, in other words, they have no resources to respond to the everyday calls, the medical aids, our engine will respond to the higher priority calls to make sure that our residents and our citizens are traveling back and forth across our state lines are protected.
Thank you, Chief Munsey. Okay. The next question, and this could be for Jim or even Chief Munsey. Are there rampant disability retirements among firefighters?
Well, I'll go ahead and speak on that. I don't know where that question came from, but I believe it comes from the Red Brennan website. But no, there's not. Firefighting, along with being a police officer or sheriff, is a very dangerous job and a very physical job. And injuries are sustained often in the fire service, whether it's in the duty of providing assistance on a structure fire or a wildland fire, or even your everyday regular job where you're going on traffic accidents. So there are injuries that are sustained, but to call it rampant, I would say that is an extreme exaggeration.
Thank you, Jim. Chief Munsey, did you want to add to that question?
I too saw this information recently, and it got me thinking because the information was referencing sheriff's departments and police departments, but not necessarily our county. Since I've been the fire chief, we've had very few retirement disabilities. However, that information could be misconstrued to look like a lot of firefighters are retiring with disabilities. For instance, for me, I was hit by a drunk driver back in 1999 while I was on an ambulance and received a back injury. So there is some disability that's associated with that has been given to me. I think it's a 5% disability. What does that mean? It means that if I have specific medical costs related to the disc issues that I have now, the county will pay for that. But that doesn't mean that the firefighters are receiving lifetime medical for a small disability or something like that, or even any kind of compensation. But if you look at how many firefighters over the career have sustained injuries, I think every firefighter sustains an injury. By its nature, it's very dangerous. But I think the real issue here is pension costs and how do we control pension costs? And we want to be careful that pension spiking doesn't occur. And retiring with a disability is a method of pension spiking that has been rampant, I believe, in the PERS system, but we're not a member of the California CalPERS. We're a member of San Bernardino County Employee Retirement Association, who does a great job in ensuring that pension spiking isn't occurring. For instance, approximately a month and a half, 2 months ago, they found a loophole that some of the employees were using by taking on call and signing up for as many on-call hours as they can, and then trying to get um, their annual wages increased by that, and then trying to retire on that. And that was immediately eliminated. So we belong to a fairly good pension system that's always looking for those things. To get a retirement medical disability, it's not something that's very simple. It requires going through a battery of independent doctors and a very long process, but it's very infrequent. The final thing on pensions is there was a information provided that showed that there's been a reduction of firefighters throughout the county along with FP5, and that's absolutely correct. And the reason is we've realized that we don't necessarily need suppression personnel or firefighters performing a lot of the services, but we do know that suppression retirement is cheaper than non-suppression retirement. For example, we used to have full-time firefighters on paramedic ambulances. Well, those ambulances would be at the hospital when there was fires, so those firefighters weren't often available for those fire emergencies. So we reduced the amount of firefighters, but instead we added ambulance operator positions, which have a lower pension. So pensions are a great subject, and it's something that we need to continue to address as a fire service. And I think that question kind of leads to that, but we've been proactively making sure that we address that to ensure that our taxpayers' dollars are spent wisely.
Thank you, Chief Munsey. We have a resident with a question, and this is the question. I live in Pinion Hills and currently pay $2,300 per year for homeowners insurance. If my local fire station closes, what will happen to my insurance? Jim, are you able to speak to that, or?
Yeah, I'll speak to it. Well, very simply, I think Chief Muncie went through it earlier in his presentation, but I'll go through it again. Basically, every area is assigned what they call an ISO rating, and it's based on where your fire station is, how long it takes them to get there. It's also based on where the water source is, how close is a fire hydrant to your house. And then also the third thing that it's based on is the staffing at your fire station. How many people are coming, how many people could get to the house if it is on fire. Obviously, if the fire station closed in Phelan, where it exists today, and they live in Pinion Hills, there would either be I'm sure there would either be an increase in their property insurance, much more than the $157, or they would have a complete elimination of their insurances. Any place that is receiving insurances now, where you take an existing fire station away and you extend the response times, there will be either elimination or an increase in their services. And while the $157 is something, I'm positive that there won't be just a $157 increase if you increase response times by upwards of 10, 20, 30 minutes. So.
Thank you, Jim. Chief Muncie, did you want to add to that, or are you good?
No, I think what Jim described with the ISO process is accurate. I would also point out that Pinion Hills, Phelan, a lot of those areas are within the high hazard area, which is designated by the state of California as being an area that's in high fire danger. We often receive insurance requests from brokers in that area that want to verify there's a fire station in that area prior to providing fire insurance. We do know that some of our areas that we serve that people live in the HHA or the high hazard areas that do not have a fire station, they often have extreme difficulty obtaining insurance.
Thank you, Chief Muncie. Natalie, I do see that you want to speak to that. Thank you.
Yeah, we saw this point brought up by the fire department during their presentation to the Upland City Council regarding the ISO ratings on fire insurance and property owners insurance and whatnot. So we looked into it. We called our insurance agents. I talked to my agent down at State Farm. We called Allstate, all of them, to figure out how these ISO ratings work and what is involved in determining what they are. The Valley ISO ratings will stay the same. Usually the more urban areas tend to have higher ISO ratings. Fontana has an ISO rating of 4. They have a wonderful fire department operation down there that was kind of kickstarted by City Council Member John Roberts, who was on the Fontana Fire Department. So Fontana potentially could see their ISO rating go up to 5, which is really good. The community of Blythe, and I believe another community out near Arizona, they recently took vast efforts to get their ISO rating increased. And that was 2 years ago. They have their own fire department operation. It's working great. It's amazing. People have wonderful response times out there, and their ISO rating still hasn't changed. So the internal review board for the insurance ISO ratings, it can take them a number of years, sometimes potentially a decade, to get the ISO rating changed in a community. It all depends on whether or not the insurance company wants to send an agent out, which can be tedious. And I don't think the closure of one fire department would affect that. We have residents in Wrightwood who get their fire insurance policies canceled every day. It's just par for the course for living in an area like that.
Thank you, Natalie. And we have one final.
Mind if I speak on that really quick, Helen? Just a
Okay.
couple things. First thing I will correct is Fontana's ISO rating is a 2. And the second thing, I will let you know that you don't want to go up in an ISO rating. That is bad. You want to go down. So if you are improving, you want to go from a 4 to a 3 or a 4 to a 2, not go from a 4 to a 5. If you have any questions about insurances, every time a home sells, you have to prove insurance, and you're going to have to provide insurance. Call any of your realtors, ask them if they close a fire station, what it will be like to try to get insurances and prove that for the transition.
Thank you, Jim. All right, one last question, and this is for the Brennan Group. Does the Red Brennan Group only disagree with the method used to increase FP5, or do they disagree with the service and funding of San Bernardino County Fire overall?
I've said this multiple times throughout canvassing and, talking to people, because it looks like we're against the fire department, and we're not. I've spoken with Chief Munzie before. I think he's a cool guy. We're against the principle behind this tax. If it were the sheriff's department raising this tax on people, we would be fighting it too. So we fully support our firefighters. What we don't support is the County Board of Supervisors imposing this illegal tax on San Bernardino County residents without their permission.
Thank you, Natalie. Okay, thank you to all of the speakers for your participation, as it is important to help educate voters to make informed decisions on Measure U, a voter initiative to repeal Fire Protection District 5, also known as FP5. It should be noted that the opinions and statements of the speakers are not a reflection of the League's opinion or position. The League of Women Voters presents the pros and cons in a nonpartisan, impartial manner. I will now turn it over to our League President, Betsy Starbuck, to provide closing remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Helen. And everybody join me in thanking Helen, County Fire Chief Dan Muncie, Natalie Zook, John Gagoli, John Longville, our Spanish interpreter, Mariela Trujillo, and our League technical support team of Scott Starbuck and Stephanie McLean. We appreciate your time and your contributions, and thank you to the attendees for taking the time to become more aware of a local ballot measure. We remind everyone that Election Day is November 3rd, but election season begins October 5th when the Registrar of Voters mails ballots to all registered voters. There are many options for voting that ballot. You can discover your options by accessing the County Registrar's website at www.sbcountyelections.com. There's no reason not to vote. If you want to check your status as a registered voter, you can go to the Secretary of State website at voterstatus.sos.ca.gov. And if you need to register or re-register, you can also do that online at www.covr.sos.ca.gov. Many times it's difficult for voters to find information about candidates that may be lower on the ballot. The League offers a free service where all candidates can post information about themselves and their positions. It's called Voter's Edge, and if you are uncertain about a candidate or want to find out a bit more and see who's supporting them, check out votersedge.org. Finally, we're a membership organization made stronger by the diversity of people who join. Membership is available through the San Bernardino Area League website. Thank you again for joining us today.